Those of you who've had dealings with me in the past know that my skill set is in breaking things. You will notice that the storm has arisen just at the point where I need the internet to work, so this could go badly. So, MyDyalog and other backroom processes. A presentation by Jason Rivers, IT Manager. Well, Jason, as you may have noticed, has other things to do at the moment, so yeah, it's me instead, and this works good. So I just wanted to quickly talk about dss.dyalog.com, which is the website, the portal you've been using to find information about Dyalog, MyDyalog.com, which is the new version, and some enhancements to that, and, provided we have time, a little bit about some of the things we've done to our internal systems, and then at the end just a list of the main subdomains of Dyalog.com, which I think you should be referring to. Part of this is to show that we spent our time, we talk about all the things we do to dialogue the interpreter and the application and the tools around it, but our internal systems are being developed all the time as well to try and make our lives easier, to make your lives easier. So, some of the enhancements. The first enhancement is we're getting rid of dss.dyalog.com. We haven't updated it since January, and we intend to take all the content down in the next few weeks probably. The one exception is the Patch Wizard workspace on Windows has the URL dss.dyalog.com hard-coded into it. That's a bit of a problem. So, we will leave dss.dyalog.com available for patch downloads, and if you try to use HTML to connect to it, you'll get redirected to my.dyalog.com. New 14.1 installation installers, including I think the last one we did, actually uses my.dyalog.com instead. I mention this mainly because I know one or two people have IT departments who are rather stroppy about what you can and cannot look at, and it would be a good idea to make sure that my.dyalog.com is whitelisted. So, myDyalog.com. It allows you to download what you're entitled to. On Windows, that's installation images. And for Windows, we only create new installation images generally when John and I think there's enough to change, particularly in the .NET support, that we try to make it so that rather than having to, a brand new user doesn't download the installation image and promptly have to update the .NET support. But what you do on Windows is you patch the interpreters. On all other platforms, the non-Windows platforms, we create new installation images and we push them up onto the website at regular intervals. I'm not quite sure what a regular interval is. It seems when it's like a good idea to do it. If you want one sooner because you've seen something in a DSS patch that you want to fix for or change for, drop support a note and we can push one up much sooner. And if you use Raspberry Pi, rather than using MyDyalog, you use apt-get and point it to the packages.dyalog.com subdomain. We will have RIDE available from MyDyalog.com in the very near future. That is, I think, Jason's and my first task when we get back from Sicily. In the past, when we first allowed you to download stuff from dss.dyalog.com, the only thing you could download was a 32-bit Unicode Windows version. Anything else, then we were pushing FTP files up onto our FTP website. And if you had purchased a 32-bit Windows or acquired a 32-bit Unicode Windows license, there wasn't anything you could do about converting it to a different form, 64-bit or something like that. But in the near future, we will you'll be able to add additional licenses to the licenses you already had, but what you will not be able to do is to change existing licenses. Effectively, when you try to register for a new version of APL with the same email address as you got before, you got a terribly helpful message saying that email address is already in use. And effectively, we've got rid of that check and added some more. So, this is where it's going to go horribly wrong. MyDyalog.com. This is a test version. This will not work for you immediately. First thing to note is that we have added the ability to have a link straight to applying for a non-commercial, educational, unregistered version. However, I don't think that's going to affect many people around here. I've not done it on this connection at this speed before, and it's a heart-stopping moment when it doesn't show you any entitlements. This is work in progress. You'll notice for a start it's a bit tricky to get one of those because we don't issue them. However, the idea is that when you log on in future, you'll be able to see which versions of APL you're entitled to and whether your download status, we may change those words, are active or not. And what this means is that I have a educational or non-commercial license. I'm allowed to download the image for 2 weeks, and that period has expired. And we're going to do something about effectively having a button that says apply for or ask for us to extend it. The other thing that we are going to add is the ability to upload and download files from my.dyalog.com. Not exactly rocket science, but it does mean that the vast majority of customers who want to push a file in our direction rather than having to get an FTP account from us and use manual processes can simply upload the file and we can pull it down the other end. That doesn't mean to say that we're getting rid of other methods that people have to acquire files and give us files. The idea is to make 95% of you, 99% of you, 99% of the time easy for you to send files to us. Jason and I have a very simple approach. At the end of the day, the most important thing is you get to us what you want us to have and vice versa. And we have the power to do almost anything at our end. On the patch side on Windows, you've always been able to download the individual patch files from an individual interpreter, one of the two X's or the two DLLs. But we now allow you to download a single zip file which has all 4 patch files in it. I see Diane's quite happy about that. So Windows patches, we are going to make a change in the future. At the moment, as I say, you can download individual patch files to the interpreter, and you can download a .NET Bridge patch file which allows you to patch the whole of the .NET stuff. We, in the near future, intend to supply a single file that allows you to patch the .NET Bridge files and the and supply an updated interpreter as well. So it's a single download and install option. Again, we're very much aware, and in future we're looking at other ways of updating Dyalog APL on all platforms. That's the 4th year I've said that. We will do it. However, we do have one big problem, and that is that some people are quite happy to say, give me the latest version of every single file you've got and I'll just install it on my box and away you go. And we have other customers who say, I want to change one file only. I want to make the minimum amount of changes because every time I make a change I have to QA everything. So if I go and take your update blob and I update every single file in my installation, I have got a huge amount of QA to do. I've got people in IT departments that say you just can't do that sort of thing. So we have to come up with solutions for both ends of the spectrum, and I suspect those in the middle as well. Okay, a bit about our internal systems, what we're doing, what we've done recently. Every platform we build Dyalog APL on, the source for Dyalog APL comes from one source tree in one SVN repository. That is for Windows, Linux, OS X, Pi and AIX. We also have one set of QA workspaces. Now obviously there's a certain amount in both cases of if it's Windows do this, if it's Linux do that, but it's one source tree. And at the moment we are building and QAing each night between 86 and 110 interpreters. Okay, because we've got 3 versions of Dyalog APL we support, we've got 1 version of APL that we're developing, we've got 5 platforms, and between 4 and 12 different flavors of interpreter to build on each one of them. And when we issue a new version, we actually leave the old version that should drop off support. We formally say we only support 3, but for a month or so we can't support 4. The QA is being developed all the time. We try to use different ways of doing them, and one of the features of the interpreter is you can enable a shuffle test. I'll talk a bit more about what that means later in the week, but effectively every time APL needs a bit of memory to do an operation, it moves every single thing in the workspace around a bit. And the point of that is, it means that if you've got a pointer pointing there, and the block of data is now over there, you really want that pointer pointing over there now. And the shuffle test checks every single time that the pointers are caught up. It does mean the QAs run Well, I've put 50,000 times longer, but one of the QAs I started on the 28th of June and it's still running. The two others that I started at about the same time, and I had a power cut, and then someone knocked the power cable out of the box they were running on, so they're taking some time to run as well. So, but they do pick up unreproducible errors, those ones where you say, I have no idea why it happened. And in many cases that's because you've just had something in a workspace move, and we found a problem there. I've got our QAs, I've got some of our APL team workspaces that I can play with. But if you have little applications that you would be happy to let me have a copy of, that I can just sit in the background and, as the box sits under my desk, with not too much user input, I'm happy to just set them running. I have a very fast box for doing this on now. We bought it solely with the amount of the memory throughput as a prime purpose for buying it. And I've also got our Power 8 box. IBM's Power 8 chip and the hardware that goes with it is about the best memory throughput box we can get. So if it can run with effectively it can run without GUI on it, that would be absolutely brilliant. But please, if you'd like us to do that, let us know. Finally, really, it's to say these are the things that you should be aware of for subdomains of Dyalog.com. You've all seen www.dyalog.com. We have defens.dyalog.com that John Scholes maintains. Defens, if you haven't looked at that website, looked at that workspace, please do. It has the answer to most of life's programming problems in it somewhere. And if it hasn't got the answers, it's got something very, very close to it. We also have helpanddocs.dyalog.com. The source of the core documentation is all in one documentation source system from which we can create CHM files for Windows users, HTML files for the online help, and the PDFs. What it also means is that, unlike earlier days when the source was in a Word document, and we would issue a version of Dyalog APL, and the documentation on that day was the documentation for the life of that version of Dyalog APL, we can now update the documentation at intervals. What I mean by that is, if I spot there's a missing space between on the, I probably won't bother to push up a new set of documentation. But when it says that plus subtracts two numbers, we'll probably end up pushing an update out sooner rather than later. Over time, we expect more and more of the documentation to end up in the documentation management system. More and more of it will be produced from one source, and more of it will update as we go along. So please, if you spot little errors in the documentation, let us know. So in the old days, people would do that, and we basically put it aside for 6 months, and then someone had the task of going through them all and updating the documentation. Now, very much so that if you tell us a problem there, we'll fix it there and then. So, that. And then we have tryapl.org, not a Dyalog domain admittedly, but under our aegis. That is based on a very early My server, and I think one of the plans will be to move it to My server 3 at some point. Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, Brian's just agreed to that plan. We all heard that. And we also use My server for the conf registration system. So you've all actually used a My server 2 and a bit, I think. Those of you who registered yourself have actually used My server in anger. We can't say that you should be using My server in anger if we don't do so. So that's what we've done for the conf registration system. And I believe that before next year's conference, it will be a truly My server 3 based website. Everyone heard that from both Jason and Brian. Will we put the whole of the Dyalog domain in My server? I have my doubts, because I'm not convinced the benefit of, for example, defens is a bunch of static HTML pages, and I'm not absolutely convinced about the benefits of doing that. There's other things we can be doing with our time. That, I think, is it, as a very brief summary of what's going on in our systems. So, thank you.